All right, welcome. So in this video, I want to show how I experimented with the brush tool to paint a structure into my map. So I'm planning to make a pyramid based on the Mayan pyramids, like Chichen Itza, and I even took a peek at an overhead view of Chichen Itza to get started. And I'm going to try and build something that looks like that. Again, such a stamp doesn't exist in such a detailed stamp, at least, doesn't exist in the Inkarnate tools. So I decided I'm going to try and paint that on just with the brush tool. So the first step I did there, you might have seen, is I adjusted the hue, sorry, not the hue, the saturation and the brightness on that brush tool there to make the stone color that I selected, the stone brush, a little brighter. A little bit later I'm going to use the normal color for that to make what look like shadows to make the structure sort of stand out. I decided to start with just placing some stairs here. This is just sort of straightforward stamp placement in Inkarnate. I did do a little bit of nitpicking here to try and get them right in the right size and the right position, so that when I copy them, because I'm going to now group them together and copy them, I'm going to paste them and then I'm going to put them all around my pyramid. I did a little bit here, seeing how they fit together. I think I resized it once, and then as you can see there, I turned off the grid and turned it back on, and then I resized because I decided I needed a little bit larger. That's something I do sometimes, is I often build my map with the grid, but I never export it with the grid. I always use my virtual tabletop to put on the grid. So the grid is there just to help me place my stamps in locations that are going to be advantageous when I do put a grid on there later on. And so here I decided that the top, I had ended up making 4 copies of those stairs, and I decided that I actually probably only need 3 so that I have enough space on the top of my pyramid. My goal was to put a secret entrance into the pyramid, so that this was stage 1 of the dungeon for my players. They had to climb up the pyramid, do a little battle with the dragon out here, mostly try and survive the dragon before they got into the safety of the pyramid. So most of what I'm trying to do now is try and think about how I'm going to get the actual shape of the pyramid to look proper. So my idea is to sort of use some shadows to do that. So before I get into doing that, I think what happened was I got started trying to do that, and I decided, well, placing stamps is what I know how to do. So I'm going to go out and do that part. So I'm going to build up the top of my tower here, or top of my pyramid. Cool little stamp I finally got to use here were those little corner stamps. It's been around for a few months now, for sure, but they've added some extra just sort of stamps to cover over where you might have some awkward joins. So when you're placing a lot of those wall stamps and other stamps, sometimes they're placed with awkward joins. They've added some new little corners and things that you can just place on top there that really blend in well and cover up some of those joins. So I got to use a few of those, and I was really trying to decorate this altar space here, but I really couldn't. There weren't really a lot of stamps that I thought, okay, this is really what I wanted for my Mayan pyramid. Even that altar that I put up there, doesn't look right. And when my players actually got there, they're like, I want to read the book. And I'm like, oh, there's not actually a book there. That was just how the stamp looked, and it made me think maybe I should paint over that book next time, put a few other stamps on it on top, make it look more like what I intended. Now you can see how I did put out that first level, and the one thing I'm doing here is I'm using the paint the grid tool, which is the first time I did that. So you'll notice it's painting only in that the grid where I was painting, but I was painting the whole grid square, so I'm getting these perfect squares. And now I just adjusted my grid so that it was, I'm guessing, 3 times as small. And now I'm using that grid to paint smaller ones. So my issue here was on the side where the shadow was cast, it was going to be easy to see where the stairs were, but on the side where the shadow technically wouldn't be cast, it's going to be hard to see where each level was, defined. So my idea was, well, maybe I'll just put this like little thin sort of line, thin little shadow, and it turned out pretty good, I think. I mean, again, it's a little hard to tell with the grid on there, but I do double check, and it definitely looked kind of nice when we played with it. Um, so I like how it turned out. So part of what I did with this map was I really tried to experiment with the brush tool and see how I like it. So here I'm just sort of checking out, like, how does that look? Does it look kind of right? And then I decided, oh wait, some of these shadows aren't right, Yeah, I'm trying to calculate in my brain, how do shadows actually work, and where do my shadows supposed to go? So I don't think this is exactly right. I think I probably should have cut them off a little bit more here. But the other thing I tend to do when I'm making these maps is I realize that this is a little tedious, and it's going to take me a lot of time to do these. As you can see, I am spending a lot of time. This is on 8 times speed, or maybe a little faster than that. The overall process took me about 3 hours. So, sometimes I'm just cutting corners in the literal sense here. I'm not making it as pretty as I could. This is just for my game. We're going to use it once and then we're going to move on. So I want it to look pretty awesome, but it doesn't need to be perfect. So the next thing that I'm going to work on here is the shadows. So I've built the shadows on the main temple, but I want to build in the shadows within my little structure here, which is it's going to have a roof on it, but the light's going to shine through it. And so as you saw there, I was trying to draw with my brush tool, and it was just looking kind of, shoddy. And I thought, there are these other tools out here, and I found, oh, hey, I can make these sort of rotated rectangles here, and I can place it out. Now this works well only because I'm using one technique for my shadow, which is I'm not using the actual shadow, the shadow paintbrush, which you will often put on the shadow and then set it to an opacity of like 50%, or I usually do about 40% or 42%. And then you can paint over your structure and it'll make a shadow for you. Here what I've done is I'm just using the gray stone shadow or the gray stone that I had for the pyramid here, and I put it back to its normal coloring, which was what I was using for the shadows out here, which is what I was using for this edge piece. And then I was just painting it on there. Now, because I'm painting it, instead of painting it with an opacity of 50% like you would do with a normal shadow, I'm painting it with 100% just pure opaque, and that made it that means that it's not going to, you can paint it as many times, you can overlap a lot of those different shapes that I was making, and it won't cause sort of an overlapping shadow look, which you can get if you were to do that with the shadow tool. So because I was using the paintbrush in this way, it happened to just work out well for me. And then later on here, when I tried to use that same technique with the shadow tools, when I kind of learned this, that, I ended up getting these weird overlapping shadows. It's not what I wanted, and there was a couple of strange artifacts on my final map. At the moment, you can see all I'm doing is adding a soft edge to some of the shadows, and the main reason I did this, well, one, I do like to do this on most of my shadows, but for these ones specifically, I wanted to differentiate between the side of the shadow that was, where the step goes up, and the side of the shadow that's just, on the current step. And so I decided one side would be a very strict line, and that's where the step goes up, and the other one's just a blurry line to indicate that's just where the shadow ends. And I think that technique kind of worked out well. It helped me visually differentiate where those edges were. Now I'm mostly into the decoration phase of the map, of making the map. I decided I maybe need some cool little statues at the corner, just more things. And when I'm thinking about decoration for these maps, not only am I trying to make it look cool, but I'm trying to think about the battle that I'm going to have on this map and what my players might do. So when I'm placing down things like statues and stuff like that, I'm thinking, oh, these are potentially places where my players are going to hide behind, or my enemies can hide behind, things like that. And sometimes, it might not be a feature that's actually going to be used in this particular battle. You might know your players. I know my players pretty well. I know the kind of things they're going to do. And let's be honest, most players just charge in and try and go toe to toe. But I like to, build up the environment, make it a little bit cooler to encourage them to do other things. And I try to reward my players when they do interesting things like that. So now I think I've switched on to, I want to build out, some of the path structure. This is an active temple for some goblinoids and others who live in this jungle area. And so I wanted to, indicate that it's currently in use. It's not sort of a ruin like some of the temples that I based this on. So I actually went up and looked up what some of the temple structures looked like in Chichen Itza and some of the other Mayan temples. And, they usually had some side buildings, not, off to the side of the main temple. And so I thought, okay, well, there's probably priests here that maintain the temple and, make sacrifices. And then they probably live somewhere. So I thought, okay, I'm going to put some buildings in. Maybe there's some smaller pyramids nearby, or there's some smaller temples. Smaller statues I put in there, and just enough space. And it turned out that this became relevant when my players came by. The first time they came by, they talked to the priests and they said, hey, can we go in there and do what we want to do? And the priest said, no, you don't have authorization to go inside of our holy temple. And of course, my players, they're a little bit murder hobo-y, and they decide, okay, well, they want to, break in. And I didn't want them to just break in without having any challenge. So, of course, I said, well, there's some priests in one of these buildings over here who hear you guys as you sneak in. They didn't roll very well. Our rogue rolled perfectly fine, and our paladin clanked on by in their armor. And I said, okay, so the local priests the local priests come out, and then I got to have the battle that I wanted, which was fun. It's never really fun to miss out on the dragon battle. So we had a fun dragon battle. Of course, this was just the precursor dragon battle before we got into inside where the dragon's lair was, and they fought the dragon and surprisingly defeated it. It was quite a tough battle. Here you can see I'm just trying to make some shadows for these statues, and I think it's right around this point where I realized that when I had painted out these larger areas, you might notice I used a transparency of, whatever might be, like I said, maybe about 40%. And so some of that stone there it looks like you can see the grass underneath it. And this is about the place where I decided to fix that. Yeah, you can see I'm still reusing that technique, making the little trapezoids and such and painting them out. I kind of got used to that, and I kind of like it. Here, I think for these smaller ones, I'm just going to freehand it. That's usually how I draw my shadows, is I just freehand them. But this time I practiced with this brush tool a lot, and I kind of like it. I'm going to use it in some of my future maps as well. This was a strange shadow. I wasn't exactly sure how I should make it look, and you'll notice I left a little bit of area with no shadow. Just, again, sometimes I compromise realism for, making it easier to understand for my players when they're actually playing on it. Like I said, some more buildings out here. This was a building where they were going to have a horn to summon the dragon. So once they started breaking in, the priest said, oh no, summon the guardian, and they summoned the dragon with the horn over there. It was kind of fun watching the bronze dragon fly in for a couple rounds while my players scurried up. Looks like I made another transparent one there by accident. I wonder if I caught those ones. All right, all that really remains for this map is adding some decorations. So let's check that out.